Here he is, friends. He got his suit back just in time. And no matter what happens in his life, he gets absolutely no respect.
Night after night, Johnny Carson welcomed Hollywood's brightest stars into America's living rooms. For up-and-coming comedians, his stage wasn't just a platform. It was the gateway to stardom. For Carson, it was where his sharp wit and effortless timing shined best. But not every guest shared that spark with him. One in particular became less of a thrill and more of a chore. To the network, this man was untouchable, a figure of immense power and influence. To Carson, he was rigid, joyless, and nearly impossible to connect with. On camera, their exchanges seemed polite, even smooth. Off camera, Carson's frustration only grew. Over time, it turned into something far stronger, an open admission that he despised this guest more than anyone else. The question is, who was it? A teen magician with big ambitions. Johnny Carson was born on October 23, 1925 in Corning, Iowa, to Ruth Elizabeth Carson and Homer Lloyd Kit Carson. His father managed a local power company while his mother stayed at home, running the household with what many described as military precision. Ruth, in particular, left a lasting impression on Johnny's childhood. She was strict, often dismissive of his accomplishments, and carried a reputation for being difficult. Even Johnny himself once referred to her as Lady Macbeth, the toughest of them all. Carson's early years were spent in small towns across southwest Iowa before the family eventually settled in Norfolk, Nebraska, when he was 8. It was there that his fascination with performing began to take shape. At the age of 12, he stumbled upon a book about magic tricks at a friend's house. Soon after, he ordered a magician's kit through the mail and practiced endlessly, performing simple card tricks for his family. Ruth, despite her sharp personality, encouraged his new hobby by sewing him a cape. By the time he was 14, Carson had his first real audience. He debuted as the Great Carsoni at a local Kiwanis Club event, later polishing his act at picnics and county fairs. After graduating from high school, he set his sights on Hollywood, even hitchhiking there in search of opportunity. A story later circulated about him being fined for impersonating a midshipman, though that tale has been debated over the years. In 1943, at just 18, Carson joined the Navy during World War II. While serving aboard the USS Pennsylvania, he became a regular in boxing tournaments, where he went undefeated with a 10-0 record. Yet even in uniform, his love for magic never faded. One of the defining moments of his naval service came when he performed tricks for Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal. After impressing the stern military leader, Carson realized he could entertain even the most serious audiences, a confidence that would guide his future career. Following the war, Carson attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where he initially studied journalism before switching to speech and drama. He aimed to become a radio announcer and graduated in 1949 with a degree in radio and speech. That same year, he married Jody Walcott, and together they welcomed 3 sons, Christopher in 1950, Richard in 1952, and Corey in 1953. Carson's career took off quickly. He started as a radio announcer, moved into television, and even hosted his own radio program, The Johnny Carson Show. He gained valuable experience writing for comedian Red Skelton before being offered his own television show on CBS. Although it was canceled after 8 months, the setback pushed him toward New York, where he built momentum as a substitute quiz show host. In 1957, he became the host of Who Do You Trust?, a gig that showcased his quick wit and improvisational style. While his professional life flourished, his marriage suffered. By 1959, he and Jody had separated, finalizing their divorce in 1962. Jody later reflected that his growing career always seemed to come before the family. That same year, Carson's career reached its defining moment. After Jack Paar stepped down from hosting The Tonight Show, Carson officially took over on October 1, 1962. His first guests included Rudy Vallee, Mel Brooks, Tony Bennett, and Joan Crawford. More than just continuing the format, Carson reshaped it. He began each show with a monologue of sharp one-liners, moved into sketches and interviews, and closed with a musical performance or a comedian. His formula became the blueprint that late-night television still follows today. In 1969, Carson found himself at the center of a bizarre controversy involving the Academy Awards. During a Tonight Show taping with comedian Buddy Hackett, the pair jokingly predicted that Oliver would win Best Picture and that Jack Albertson would take home Best Supporting Actor. When the Oscars aired later that evening, those predictions turned out to be exactly right. With odds of 1 in 25, many wondered if they had somehow gained access to inside information. The situation sparked concern at Price Waterhouse, the firm responsible for securing the votes, though they later concluded that it was simply a lucky guess. The Academy, too, chose not to hold the incident against Carson, who would eventually go on to host the Oscars 5 times. The man who couldn't be canceled. In the early years of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson welcomed some of the biggest names in American politics. Robert F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and even Richard Nixon all took a seat across from him. But by the 1970s, Carson shifted the focus. Politics took a back seat, and entertainment became the centerpiece. That approach stayed with the show for the rest of its run. Carson played the role of diplomat with remarkable skill. He avoided political sides in his monologues, interviews, and comedy routines, knowing that neutrality kept his massive audience engaged. Instead, he filled the stage with a steady stream of rising stars and legendary performers. Careers were launched in front of his cameras. George Carlin, Robin Williams, Joan Rivers, Jerry Seinfeld, Drew Carey, and Gary Shandling are just a few who gained momentum after appearing on Carson's show. The show itself also made a big move. Originally filmed live at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City, production shifted to Burbank, California in 1972. The relocation brought the glamour of Hollywood closer to Carson's stage. For all his warmth on screen, Carson kept his distance once the cameras stopped rolling. He rarely socialized with guests before or after tapings, even with those he'd known for years. It was a business-first mindset. And considering how many hours a day he spent performing, it made sense. Carrying the weight of being America's familiar face was no small task. Still, there were rare moments when he broke his own rule. One of the most memorable came in September 1976, when Orson Welles appeared on the show. Carson admired the Citizen Kane star so much that he greeted him personally before the taping, something that stunned his staff. Carson's Midwestern charm also gave him a surprising amount of leeway with humor. He often pushed boundaries with female guests, making remarks that might have been offensive coming from anyone else. His longtime co-host Ed McMahon often joked that Johnny could say things other hosts never would have survived. The high ratings seemed to back that up. Some of Carson's most talked-about moments came from these flirtatious interviews. In one notorious exchange, he told Dolly Parton he'd give a year's salary for a look under her clothes. He once admitted to Madonna that he had no idea what a bustier was. And during an interview with his friend Lucille Ball, he shocked everyone by asking her how old she was when she lost her virginity. Lucille looked stunned, while Carson laughed, admitting her reaction was exactly what he had been hoping for. The Dolly Parton moment became one of the most infamous. In 1977, Dolly was still a rising star, while Carson was already an institution. The chemistry between them was obvious, and Carson leaned into it. At one point, he told her he would happily pay his entire salary to see her naked bosom. Dolly laughed it off, later joking that she'd pay for the chance to shower with him. Despite how bold the moment seemed, it never hurt their professional relationship. If anything, it showed how Carson's wit and charm often softened the edge of his forwardness. Betty White was another close friend and frequent guest. She not only appeared for interviews but often joined Carson in sketches, many of which somehow involved the two of them playing characters without clothes. Betty later joked that Johnny must have just called her every time he wanted an excuse to strip down. Then came Sophia Loren in 1979. Carson couldn't resist flirting with the glamorous Italian star. During their chat, he handed her a gift box containing a red garter, telling her he knew she believed red brought good luck. Sophia seemed amused, and in return, she gave him a small red bag of salt she carried for the same reason. Somehow, Carson once again managed to charm his way through a risky move that might have backfired on someone else. And then there was the legendary rumor about Zsa Zsa Gabor. According to the story, she brought a cat onto the set and asked Johnny if he wanted to pet her. Carson supposedly quipped that he would, if only the cat weren't in the way. To this day, many doubt the story ever happened. Jane Fonda even confronted him about it on the show years later, but Carson brushed it off, claiming he had no memory of such a moment. True or not, it fit his reputation. Carson had a history of pushing the envelope with female guests, and audiences had come to expect it. Even if the Zsa Zsa story was nothing more than an urban legend, the fact that so many people believed it said everything about Johnny Carson's larger-than-life presence on late-night television. The cruel drunk behind the curtain. Johnny Carson's struggles with alcohol were no secret. When he drank, which was often, his darker side would come out. Friends and colleagues remembered him as a cruel drunk who showed little sympathy for others. In 1982, those habits caught up with him when he was pulled over for driving his DeLorean under the influence. He pled no contest to a misdemeanor charge and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. The court also ordered him to attend an alcohol program, and his driving privileges were sharply restricted. He could only use his car to travel to and from work, and he was forbidden from driving with passengers, human or animal. Carson was never one to deny his addiction. He avoided the press to sidestep intrusive questions, but he didn't pretend the problem didn't exist. In fact, he spoke openly about it at times, even working those experiences into the way he joked about alcohol on The Tonight Show. In a revealing interview with 60 Minutes, Carson admitted he had once tried to drink like others but couldn't handle it. While he recalled some fun times, he made it clear that most of his drinking years were far from glamorous. Comedy legend Joan Rivers was one of Carson's most frequent guests and one of his most important professional allies. Known later for her sharp wit and fearless roasting, Rivers had a much more understated style when she started out in 1950s New York. When she first appeared on The Tonight Show in 1965, Carson immediately recognized her talent and predicted she would become a star. That single appearance changed her life, leading to a writing job on the show and eventually the coveted role of guest host whenever Carson was away. For years, their partnership seemed unbreakable. Rivers was fiercely loyal to Carson, refusing offers from rival shows and even turning down chances at her own program. But in 1986, their relationship collapsed. That year, Rivers accepted a deal with Fox to host her own late-night program, The Late Show with Joan Rivers, which aired directly against The Tonight Show. Carson felt betrayed. He banned her from The Tonight Show entirely, and even blacklisted guests who appeared on her competing program. Rivers later explained why she had taken the risk. When Carson's contract was renewed for 2 years, hers was cut to 1, a signal she interpreted as NBC questioning her future. To make matters worse, when she saw a list of potential replacements for Carson, her name wasn't even mentioned. Despite her years of loyalty as the permanent guest host, she felt overlooked and underestimated, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry. The fallout was brutal. Carson never forgave her. Rivers claimed that when she first got the Fox offer, she called Carson, but he hung up and denied the call ever happened. Even in public, if she tried to approach him at a restaurant, he would turn his back. She later reflected that Carson seemed to feel she belonged to him, as if her career had to exist under his control. The two never reconciled, and the feud followed her for the rest of her life. Despite his complicated personal and professional relationships, Carson remained the king of late night. In 1987, pop icon Madonna chose him for her talk show debut. She made sure it was unforgettable, arriving in lingerie that left Carson visibly caught off guard. Expecting some avant-garde new fashion statement, he asked her about the outfit. Madonna casually revealed it was just a simple bustier she had picked up at a store. The playful exchange added to Carson's reputation as a master of handling surprises on live television. Even so, Carson had his limits. In a 1987 interview with Betty White, he admitted that Audrey Hepburn had once completely unnerved him. When she appeared on The Tonight Show more than a decade earlier, Carson, usually cool and collected, found himself at a loss for words. Hepburn's grace, her reserved nature, and her sheer presence rattled him in a way few ever did. By then, she had already built a legendary career in film, theater, and fashion, while also serving as a dedicated humanitarian and UNICEF ambassador. Her elegance was undeniable, and even the great Johnny Carson wasn't immune to her quiet power. The legendary rivalry born from a farewell. Before Johnny Carson said his final goodbyes on The Tonight Show in 1992, NBC gave him 2 nights dedicated to his farewell. It was only fitting. He had been the face of late-night television since 1962, and his exit marked the end of an era. On May 21, 1992, Carson welcomed 2 massive stars, Robin Williams and Bette Midler. Williams kicked things off, strolling on stage with a bizarre rocking chair shaped like a guitar, which he joked had once belonged to Elvis. At the time, his hair was bleached blonde for the film Toys, but that didn't matter. He had Carson laughing non-stop. The two even went back and forth trading Ronald Reagan impersonations, reminding everyone why Williams was such a comedic force. Then Bette Midler came out in a playful black outfit decorated with giant daisies. She lit up the stage, first singing a funny twist on You Made Me Love You. Soon after, she perched on Carson's desk and joined him in a warm, intimate duet of Here's That Rainy Day. To close the evening, she delivered a breathtaking rendition of One for My Baby and One More for the Road, slipping Carson's name into the lyrics. By the end, the host, who rarely showed emotion, was visibly teary-eyed. The following night, May 22, 1992, the final Tonight Show with Johnny Carson aired. Unlike the night before, it was a quieter, more reflective hour. It opened with a montage of highlights stretching back to his very first episode 3 decades earlier. By then, Carson had walked through the curtain nearly 5,000 times, always introduced with Ed McMahon's booming voice announcing, "Here's Johnny." That last night, Carson delivered his monologue from a stool placed center stage. He admitted he had loved every minute of his time on The Tonight Show and said that if given the chance, he would do it all over again. He explained that the invitation-only audience was filled with the families and friends of his staff, but noted that the evening would have been perfect if his late son, Rick, could have been there. With quiet honesty, he added that life unfolds the way it is meant to, and you accept it and move forward. Critics understood exactly what made Carson so iconic. Vanity Fair's James Wolcott described him as cool, unflappable, and precise. Comedy's Blue Diamond, a master who set the standard for excellence. To Wolcott, Carson's Tonight Show was the ultimate audition stage, a place where countless comedians earned their first shot at stardom. But as Carson left, NBC faced a late-night crossroads. Many assumed David Letterman, who had followed Carson for more than a decade, would naturally inherit The Tonight Show. Carson himself believed Letterman was the rightful successor. After all, Letterman idolized him, and his first appearance on Carson's stage in 1978 helped launch his career. Yet despite Carson's preference, NBC handed the job to Jay Leno. The decision created a rift. Letterman, feeling betrayed, bolted from NBC and launched The Late Show on CBS in 1993, going head-to-head with Leno. Carson's relationship with Leno also fractured. He believed that Leno's camp had planted false stories in the press suggesting NBC was eager to push him aside. Though Leno denied involvement, Carson never fully trusted him and never once appeared on Leno's Tonight Show. His bond with Letterman, however, never wavered. In 1994, Carson made his final television appearance not on NBC, but on Letterman's show, receiving a thunderous standing ovation as he stepped on stage. Letterman's joy was written all over his face. It was clear he was welcoming his mentor and friend. Carson never returned to the camera after that, but he didn't abandon comedy. He remained a loyal viewer of Letterman's show, occasionally slipping him jokes to use in his monologues. Even in retirement, the king of late night found ways to keep audiences laughing, proving that his influence stretched far beyond his final bow. Carson's final years in the shadows. On March 19, 1999, Johnny Carson suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Malibu, California. He was rushed to a hospital in Santa Monica, where doctors performed a quadruple bypass surgery. The heart problems were not a surprise to those who knew his habits. For decades, Carson had been a heavy smoker, often lighting up cigarettes right on camera during the early years of The Tonight Show. At his peak, he was going through 4 packs of Pall Malls every single day. By the mid-1970s, he was already warning people around him, often saying that cigarettes were killing him. His younger brother later recalled that their last conversation was filled with Johnny cursing those same cigarettes. In 2002, Carson declined NBC's invitation to appear at the network's 75th anniversary. By September of that year, he made it public that he was living with emphysema, though he stressed he wasn't terminally ill. Just a few years later, on January 23, 2005, He passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from respiratory failure caused by emphysema. His body was cremated, and his ashes were given to his wife, Alexis Moss. In keeping with his family's wishes, there was no public memorial service. The late-night world felt the loss deeply. David Letterman, one of Carson's closest friends and admirers, honored him the way Carson would have wanted, through comedy. On his first monologue after Carson's death, Letterman delivered jokes that Carson himself had written. Letterman later described Carson as a kind of public utility, someone people expected to be there at the end of every day. Carson's influence on television was unmatched. During his run on The Tonight Show, ratings soared, nearly doubling the numbers brought in by Steve Allen and Jack Paar. With that success came enormous paychecks. In the 1970s, Carson became the highest-paid celebrity on television, and by the early 1990s, his annual salary had reached $25 million. Even though he stepped away from television more than a decade before his death, his net worth still stood at around $300 million. Despite his fortune, Carson was far from greedy. He was generous, creating the John W. Carson Foundation, which became the main beneficiary of his trust. Valued at $156 million at first, the fund later grew to $200 million. The foundation focused on supporting children, education, and health services, particularly in Los Angeles and in Nebraska, the state where Carson grew up. On top of that, he donated another $4 million directly to the Los Angeles Children's Hospital. When it came to his personal estate, his wife Alexis Moss inherited the majority of what wasn't directed to charity. She shared it with Carson's two surviving sons, Chris and Corey. His third son, Richard, had tragically died in a car accident in 1991. All of Carson's children came from his first marriage to Jody Morrill Wolcott. While Carson did leave money to them, it was clear that he never had especially close relationships with his sons. Yet Richard's death had shaken him deeply. It made him more reflective about life and was part of what pushed him toward retirement. During his final sign-off on The Tonight Show, Carson spoke directly to his children, acknowledging the challenges of being raised in the shadow of a famous father. He told them he loved them before closing out his legendary run. After that, he lived a quiet, private life with Moss at his Malibu estate until his death. She later sold the property in 2007 for $36.5 million. Today, Carson's descendants live far from the spotlight, none of them choosing to follow his path into Hollywood. But his legacy still echoes across late-night television. From Jay Leno to Jimmy Fallon, who took over The Tonight Show in 2014, Carson's influence can be felt in every host who came after him. His mix of humor, humility, and humanity secured him a lasting place in entertainment history and in the hearts of audiences who grew up watching him night after night. Carson's true self revealed offstage. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show was more than just a late-night program, it was a cultural landmark. Launching on October 1, 1962 and running for nearly 3 decades until May 22, 1992, it shaped television history. But along with its success came its share of controversy. From Johnny's edgy jokes to his turbulent personal life, the tabloids never ran out of material. And through it all, one person was always by his side, his loyal co-host, Ed McMahon. Carson's humor sometimes pushed boundaries, often at the expense of celebrities, which earned him both laughs and enemies. Still, his quick wit kept audiences hooked night after night. But behind the curtain, Johnny was far from the charismatic figure he projected. According to Ed McMahon, who spent more time with him than anyone else, the real Carson was reserved, shy, and at times distant. McMahon revealed these insights in his memoir, Here's Johnny, published in 2005 shortly after Carson's death. He explained that Johnny's cold reputation stemmed less from arrogance and more from his natural shyness. Off-camera, Carson often struggled in social settings. He even once joked that he'd be better at parties if everyone had a little red camera light on their forehead, the same signal that made him come alive in front of an audience. Ed was one of the few people Johnny let pass that wall. Their bond ran deep, marked by little traditions, like exchanging birthday phone calls where Carson would gift him a brand new joke every year. Sometimes Johnny even treated his friend to private comedy shows. On one occasion aboard Carson's yacht, he performed a full routine of jokes, impressions, and stories that lasted over an hour and a half just for Ed. Fittingly, The last time McMahon saw Johnny alive was also on that boat, sharing laughs and stories as they always had. Of course, their partnership wasn't without its rough moments. McMahon recalled a time on The Tonight Show when he accidentally stepped on one of Johnny's jokes during a sketch about mosquito spray. Johnny brushed it off with a sharp quip about McMahon finding new work at a Chevy dealership. Though it was said in jest, Ed took the lesson to heart. His role wasn't to compete for laughs, but to support Johnny's timing and delivery. From then on, he became more careful about when to speak and when to simply laugh along. Being Carson's sidekick wasn't always easy. McMahon had hosted shows of his own before, so holding back his instinct to jump in could be a challenge. But he learned the art of balance, knowing when to step forward and when to fade into the background. Not everyone understood the importance of that role. A teenage fan once teased him, saying a laugh track could replace him. McMahon quickly shot back that a laugh track couldn't spell Alpo, a nod to one of their best-known sponsors. Their partnership stretched beyond The Tonight Show. The two first worked together on the game show Who Do You Trust? From 1957 to 1962, before moving to late-night glory. Outside of his work with Carson, McMahon built an impressive career of his own. He hosted Star Search throughout the 1980s and 1990s, co-hosted TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes alongside Dick Clark, presented American Family Publishers sweepstakes, and anchored the Jerry Lewis MDA telethon for decades. He even made appearances in films like Fun with Dick and Jane and Full Moon High. Through McMahon's perspective, Johnny Carson's true nature becomes clearer. The same man who could command the stage and captivate millions was, in private, shy, guarded, and often solitary. His off-screen life revealed a striking contrast to the confident host the world adored. McMahon's memoir painted Carson not just as an entertainer, but as a complex figure who struggled with the same insecurities as anyone else. Proof that even the king of late night was human after all. Johnny Carson truly hated him more than anyone. For 3 decades, from 1962 until 1992, Johnny Carson reigned over late-night television as host of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Night after night, he welcomed an endless lineup of guests, some already household names, others just beginning their climb to stardom. For rising comedians, a spot on Carson's couch could change everything. Jerry Seinfeld, Joan Rivers, and many others found their first big break on his stage, catapulting them into the spotlight. At the same time, the show also drew A-list celebrities of the era, including icons like Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope. Carson quickly became NBC's golden boy, but within the network, there was always one comedian who carried more weight: Bob Hope. Hope had been a star at NBC long before Johnny, and his influence stretched so far that he essentially treated The Tonight Show as his personal platform. Whenever Bob had a new special to promote, he could call the producers, and a guest spot would magically open up. Johnny always agreed, but behind the scenes, his enthusiasm for Hope's visits was non-existent. The truth was that Carson disliked Bob Hope, and over time, that dislike grew stronger. By the end of his Tonight Show run, Johnny considered Hope one of his least favorite guests. A big reason for this was their opposite approaches to comedy. Carson thrived on improvisation and loved organic conversations, while Hope depended entirely on his writers. Even at the height of his career, Bob rarely strayed from a script. As he grew older, this reliance became even more extreme. He sometimes needed his writers to explain what was happening around him. Carson, who made the decision to retire while still sharp and in control, viewed Hope's decline as a cautionary tale. Watching Bob cling to the stage long after his timing had faltered convinced Johnny not to let himself go down the same road. He often said that Hope's appearances were stiff and predictable, more advertisement than entertainment. A typical segment featured Bob rolling out canned jokes before showing an overlong reel promoting his next project. What was supposed to be a 2-minute clip often dragged on for 5, leaving Carson visibly frustrated. There was also Hope's boldness. On one occasion, after hearing the audience erupt with laughter during Johnny's monologue, Bob asked if he could have a recording of the laughter track to use in his own television special. Johnny agreed, but the request left him stunned by Hope's audacity. As Hope's health declined, the situation only worsened. By his later years, he struggled to follow even the simplest conversation unless Carson stuck precisely to the scripted questions. If Johnny improvised or veered off the card, Bob might respond with an answer meant for an entirely different prompt. leaving the exchange awkward and disjointed. Carson endured these visits because he felt obligated. Hope's stature at NBC left him with no choice. Yet behind closed doors, he often vented to his crew about the ordeal. After one particularly difficult appearance, he reportedly told them to shoot him if he ever ended up like Bob. To the public, the relationship between the two comedians looked friendly enough, but in reality, Carson saw Hope less as a peer and more as a burden. What audiences thought was a warm, recurring guest spot was, in Johnny's eyes, one of the least enjoyable parts of hosting The Tonight Show.